You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted, a conversation on Christian ministry and the Christian life.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Josiah Walker.
I'm Bryan Catherman.
And on today's episode, we're continuing our study through the book of Revelation. But buckle up, because we're going to cover some ground today.
Yeah, we need to.
Kind of like with our systematic theology episodes, we found that there's no way to really cover everything on a podcast, unless this was Bible Talk podcast, where you're just going through small sections forever.
Which hopefully our listeners are listening to Bible Talk podcast, because it's fantastic.
And why would we?
I wish those guys were on our podcast.
Me too.
They're great.
So, while we have no business doing the podcast they're doing, because it's perfect, what we want to do is, you can study Revelation on your own, but we want to kind of use this forum to really show some nuggets and some different study tools and just little tidbits to help you as you're reading through and studying Revelation on your own.
I think that's kind of why we set out. You don't have to be afraid of this. This is supposed to be a blessing. We've been preaching through it at Redeeming Life, and so it's been really it's been good to see, we're preaching through it in smaller nuggets than we're taking in the podcast. But it's good to see that you can handle the book, and it's good.
Yeah. And I think it'll be helpful to talk through this while it's fresh on our minds. So,
here's what's kind of going on. I don't know if this will help you, but what we have is a divergent view, or three views on what's happening from what we talked about last time with the seals.
Yep.
To now it seems like we're repeating, right? Or we're not, or there's something else going on. Right. And so I think what's really helpful for people is to understand sort of the ways this can be structured, the ways we can come to view this and what's happening here. So we have the seven seals.
Yep.
The seventh seal sort of gives way to the trumpets.
And that's kind of where we left off last time.
Yeah, and the seventh trumpet sort of gives way to the bowls, and you have a little interlude between the sixth and seventh trumpet, and then you have an interlude between this. You have the interlude between the sixth and seventh seal, where we see the worshiping and the whatever, and then the bowls. There's kind of something going on there. There's not a lot of interlude between the sixth and the seventh bowl, but here's what's helpful. Here's where I think our listeners will be benefited. If you're reading through Revelation, I hope you are, there's three different approaches to the book of Revelation and how it's structured.
Okay,
I think all three of the approaches, well, at least the first two approaches, we'll say approach number one, approach number two, at least, say the first three chapters are dealing with John's present day and possibly the church in the world, which would also apply all the way to where we're at today. So Jesus shows up, shows his glory. Here's 7 letters. We've talked about those pretty extensively.
Right.
Then, kind of everything else, at least in the first two approaches, is dealing with either kind of behind the curtain into the spiritual realm, is one way to kind of take it, or it's dealing with a look into and at future events that'll be happening at the very end of the world. All this stuff will be compressed. Right. Or it's trying to at least explain how the whole thing is going to end. Now, this is where it gets tricky. There's one approach where all of this that we're reading, from the seals to the trumpets to the bowls and beyond, is all linear and telling a story without any flash forwards, without any flashbacks, without any instant replays. It literally all goes this thing, then that thing, then that thing. So in that case, the seals are completely separate and completely different from the trumpets.
Okay.
Which are completely different and completely separate from the bowls.
Okay.
And in that, none of those things are looking forward or looking back.
Right.
Okay, that's one way to look at it. And I'll bring an illustration into this, a couple of them in a minute.
Right.
The second way to look at it is...
So that first one's linear? Is that
It's just completely linear. It's a linear explanation of the timeline of future events.
Yep.
Right, so it's linear with one perspective.
Consecutively.
Yeah, just one, so nothing that happens in later chapters, nothing that's going to happen in chapter 9 and 10 could happen at any point. It's not explaining anything that could have happened and been explained in 6.
Right.
Or, this, then this, then this.
Right.
The second way to approach this, which I think is quite a bit more common, I think this is more commonly accepted, and I'll just put my cards on the table, this is the approach I take, is what we're actually seeing is, it's called recapitulation, but we're seeing multiple perspectives and different angles of things that are trying to describe one singular event. So it's trying to describe the last days.
Sure.
Except it's giving us a couple different angles to look at. It's going back in time, maybe with a flashback. Maybe it's going to jump forward a little bit and give us a little foreshadowing. Maybe. But we have lots of different views into some things. So it's the debate is...
Maybe different perspectives, different views.
Different perspectives, a different vantage point. The challenge is, and the debate in this is people debate where those breaks are. Yeah. Wait, where is this coming into a different view? What's being repeated? Is there 2 views? Is there 4 views? Is there 7 views? Is there?
Can you repeat what you called this again?
The term you see used the most is recapitulation.
Awesome.
It's like kind of a repeating situation of spiraling things.
All right. And that's pretty common. A lot of Bible scholars hold that view.
I think you see this. I think a lot of people will go, okay. And when I give an illustration, it might make more sense. Sure. The last view, which doesn't really work with the illustration, but I'll still give an illustration with it. It's kind of fun. The last view is a thematic structuring of the book.
Okay.
And so in this particular case, the idea is that the book is structured in such a way so as to lump things that are all similar together by theme, whatever that theme might be. So rather than trying to explain and express a final event or something in time, it's trying to explain attributes of the last days. Yeah. And so this would be like Jesus constantly is got parables where he says the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he has a parable. The parable says one thing about the kingdom of heaven, and the authors of the Gospels who do this will lump them together. So here's a whole bunch of parables together, which maybe he did parables that weren't quite so lumped together. If we did a perfect linear story of Jesus, maybe those parables weren't shared in that exact way. But let's do all the kingdom parables, and then let's do all this. Or John, who also is the one God used to write Revelation, he lumped the 7 signs in the book of John first, and then comes the 7 I am statements. Right. It's a thematic structuring around those things. So there are some who will argue that these are thematic structurings that fit something to just simply explain end times rather than explain a timeline of events or something like that.
Yeah.
So those are the 3 primary ways to look at this. And then within each of those ways, there's a lot of different views.
Sure.
So let me give you an illustration to help make this more memorable.
Okay.
So we have the first approach, the linear approach. Imagine a football game.
Yes.
And we have a camera. The camera is broadcasting live, and we only have one camera.
Oof.
Okay. There's no way to do an instant replay. Okay. There's no other views.
Okay.
It's like you see it, like as if somebody's holding their phone, live streaming the high school football game from wherever they're standing, from start to finish.
Okay.
That's how that first view would be. And so if we read it, that's how the book is going.
Yep.
The second view is more like what happens when you watch ESPN football games.
Sure.
They have a whole bunch of cameras, and one's zooming around on a cable, and one's the pulled back view, and one's following the receivers, and another one's following the quarterback, and one's looking through the goalpost, and one's going this way. And after a major event, something happens, we can go, wait, let's do a little replay. Let's go back and see that from this camera and that camera. And so some people say, well, some of these things might be a different scene showing us something from the same event. Now, if you watched all those things and thought each one happened after the other, it'd be really confusing. Wow, they just scored 19 touchdowns on that play.
Right.
But when we recognize, okay, this is explaining something, and a football producer of a college game, professional game, can go, man, notice he's limping here, and then all of a sudden they cut back to a scene from the first quarter where we're now at the end of the game where he got injured. Oh, he's still facing some of these, or So you have a lot of different scenes that are all showing us the football game. Right. And that's something that could be the way the book is structured. And I think that makes sense when you read it. Yeah. There are times when you go, wait, this seems like it's explaining something in the past. This seems very similar. The trumpets seem similar, and the bowls seem similar, and we have these plagues again, and where do these people come from? And maybe it's explaining the same events. In that last approach, the thematic approach, imagine that the football producer records the whole game.
Okay.
And then says, okay, I'm going to show everybody this football game by first taking all of, who's your favorite football team?
Well, for me, it's the Raiders.
Okay, so we're going to
go with the Utes if you'd like.
Well, that's a weird football game. So you got Team A and Team B.
Sure.
And they're the producer takes all of the running plays from Team A and shows us all of those plays first.
Interesting.
And organizes those by the shortest run to the longest run. So they're not in chronological order. They're just in small runs to big runs. Then we watch all of the plays, the passing plays. First, we see all the incomplete passes. Then we see all the shorter passes. Then we see all the longer passes. Or it could be all the passes to this guy, all the passes to that guy. It's almost like we're watching a highlight reel, right?
Right.
Then we watch all the running plays organized that way of the other team.
Yeah.
And then we watch all the passing plays of the other team. And then all the scoring plays got reserved till the end for fun. It's the finale.
Right.
So first we watch all the extra points kicked by one team. And then we watch all the extra points kicked by the other team. Then we watch all the two-point conversion attempts.
Right.
Then we watch all the field goals. Then we watch all the touchdowns. Okay, could you make sense of the football game very well?
Not really.
So if we're not actually describing some kind of timeline of events or an event,
sure,
the thematic way would work. But I think we are describing a timeline of events, so I'm not really the biggest fan of this thematic approach.
And I'm guessing not many people are.
You do find it. You find it in the people that want to say this is just very symbolic, and the book is very symbolic, but it's very symbolic in a sense to just give you a feel. Well, I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Right? So I think the thematic structure is, I don't know which one's the most popular. I know there are some legitimate scholars who take all three of these views.
Yeah.
There's legitimate preachers that take all three of these views. Yeah. But I think the easiest, if you're approaching the book yourself, you're going, oh, okay, this seems like it's talking about a past event. Yeah. Wait, this seems like it's talking about a similar event but being told in a different way.
Yeah.
Okay, these symbols seem to be representing this kind of similar things here and there. Okay, I get what's happening. Yeah. So I think when you take the approach that there's a possibility of multiple scenes, the biggest debate is it 2 scenes?
Right.
Is it, after chapter 3 is 4 on.
Yeah.
2 scenes, is it 4 scenes, or is it 7 scenes?
Interesting.
The 7 would play well into all the other 7s and stuff, but that's for you to decide as you read through. Okay, so the reason I share all that, and we haven't really got into these chapters, is because I think what we've got going on now is the possibility of seeing this judgment from another vantage point.
Right.
Seeing these plagues, and so you have the trumpets coming in a whole new way, right?
Which I could understand as you're looking at bowls and trumpets and scrolls. But
there's also 7 signs, by the way.
Right.
So you have these 7 signs where it says, and then I saw. Let's see, that starts in. Is that in 12 where that begins? Let me look here. And it's like, it's the woman, it's the dragon, it's the beast, it's the next beast, it's these are the signs.
Okay.
So there's 7 of those, right? And so people would argue that that's another way to look.
That was what I wanted to kind of look at next there's all this other stuff, and I didn't know if that was part of those interludes or what it was, because you've got the woman and the child and the dragon, right? And the beast, the witnesses. And
So one approach is that you have these judgments of trumpets and these judgments or plagues of the bowls, and the interlude is kind of telling us a bigger story. Right. Which kind of makes sense when you see the woman, she's going to give birth, the dragon's going to consume the baby, but then she's protected in the wilderness, and then you have these things that are all happening that are going to lead people off this way. If you have some of this stuff happening before all of that, it's hard to get a linear timeline. For example, you have this Armageddon in the 6th bowl, but then it seems like you have at the end this another final battle that's discussed. And there is a possibility of maybe there's 2 returns of Jesus, but maybe that's 2 accounts of the same thing.
Right.
So in those events, I don't know if there's anything specific in there you want to talk about, but because it's all the stuff the interlude, so chapter 12, let's see, the witnesses. So chapter 11 and 12 especially, and 13 become the stuff of book series of the 90s.
Right. I see that.
Movies, here's where the beast and the woman and the false antichrist. But then if you line that up with a lot of other scripture, you kind of go, wait, maybe there's more going on, because we read elsewhere that the Antichrist is here and already come, and antichrists and And so you line it up with other things and go, maybe this is a description of the whole church age.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a description of the last week of time. I don't,
And that's one thing that's really helpful is to think through all the moving parts, all the different pieces. Because, for instance, in Revelation 13, in verse 18, you see that the mark of the beast, the number is 666.
Right.
And it seems like we all focus on that. But in the preaching series you've been doing here at the church, you talked about how Christians are marked as well.
Yeah. So you go back a little bit. So you just go back to the 144,000, excuse me. Chapter 7, don't harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed or marked the servants of our God on their foreheads.
Right.
And I heard this is the number. So they've been marked somehow. And then there's another one that's like, don't harm, let me see if I can find that. Don't harm any of those that bear the mark of, like this. I don't know what the mark is. I'm scanning really quickly.
No, for sure.
And then you read commentaries. This is the hard part. Finding any good commentaries in this is really tough.
Right.
There are some, but it's really tough because all of a sudden someone will go, well, that must have been, obviously that was an ichthus fish.
Well,
and like, what? Or a cross, or what,
And I think a lot of times, I don't know if we just get lazy, or we just want to trust maybe our favorite preachers or teachers or favorite commentators, and so we just go with what they say blindly without really doing some work to say, well, how did they come to that source? How did they come to that conclusion? Yeah.
So the one that I really appreciate, the commentary I found the most helpful is, I can't remember, is it Beakey or Beale? Who wrote this one?
It's
Beale, I think. It's Greg Beale, yeah. So it's the New Testament use of the Old Testament.
Right.
Man, that's been so helpful because it shows me that they're really doing their work. Here's an allusion to this Old Testament passage. Then you go back and read that whole section of the Old Testament. You start seeing remarkable connections.
Yeah.
And you see how, that's what was being communicated there. This is what's being communicated here. What they're doing is they're giving you sort of a structure for the Bible, interpreting the Bible.
Right.
And it's been the most helpful, hands down, for me.
And I think we talked about that book at the beginning of this series in one of those episodes where we also couldn't remember the author's name.
Right, exactly.
but it's been helpful. So at this point, on this episode, we've kind of talked through it and just covered bits and pieces from chapter 8 all the way through what, like 16, 17?
Well, I think this helps make some sense of the seals,
and just all the
signs,
different imageries there.
the trumpets, and the bowls. Now, we could really drill down into some of these things, but I'll say there's a major point happening here. God is sovereign over all of it.
Sure.
God is bringing judgment. There's a section in here where an angel sings that this judgment is deserved. Where is that? 16. Let's see. 16. Is that right? Yeah. So 16:5. I heard an angel of the waters say, "You are just to God, the Holy One, who is and who was, because you have passed judgment on these things. Because they," meaning the people being judged, "poured out the blood of the saints and the prophets. You," meaning God, "have given them blood to drink," which is what this bowl did. It turned all the rivers into blood.
Right.
"You have given them blood to drink. They deserve it." That's 16:6. And then I heard the altar say, "Yes, Lord God Almighty, true and just are your judgments." And so I think as you work through this, you get a sense that God is sovereign over all this.
Yeah.
15:1 calls all of this God's wrath, and these will be God's wrath completed. So there is judgment.
Okay.
It is deserved.
Right.
God is sovereign over creation. God is using creation to bring judgment, like 100-pound hailstones and turning waters into blood and bringing all these plagues. If you think back to like Exodus, he did that to Pharaoh so that the people, the whole world, will know that he is God.
Right.
So that's this situation.
Yeah.
And you go back to, I think we already talked about it, but you go back to, all the way back to chapter 6, 16 and 17.
Yeah.
So there's all this judgment coming. And they said, these sinful people that are going to be avenged for killing, again, similar thing we just read about from the bowls.
Yeah.
They're going to be avenged for killing the martyrs. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb." So now the Lamb has this wrath.
Yeah.
"Because the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?"
Right.
That's really the premise for what we're reading all through these judgments.
Yeah.
No one, and then the next things you read is people are standing, but no one can stand without Christ. No one can stand up against this. God is completely sovereign. It's not going to be thwarted by the devil.
Right.
the devil's not going to get a foothold in this. It's not undetermined. It's completely set. But also, this judgment is set.
Yeah.
And if you're not with Christ, this judgment is deserved. And we should sense that. So how is the whole thing a blessing? One, because if you're not with Christ, it's a blessing to be called back to the Lord and have an opportunity for salvation.
Yes.
Two, if you're sitting here going, hey, all these saints are being martyred. Hey, they killed the prophets. God, when are you going to do something about this?
Yeah.
He's saying, I got this.
Right.
Trust me, I got this. And so you read these 7 seals, 7 signs, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls.
Yeah.
Or 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 signs, 7 bowls. You read that and go, oh yeah, he really had. This is bigger than shock and awe. This is overwhelming force coming from God.
Yeah.
Right? So it should bring comfort that that's my God and he's got this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And that's what's so powerful in all of this is we can get caught up in the weeds and the minutia of what is this and what is that, but it's important that we understand that overarching theme.
If you miss that, you're blind. If you miss the salvation of Christ, you're blind, and you're doomed. You're going to be facing all this.
Yeah.
No matter how you sort of go, well, are Christians going to be there? Are they not? Is there a rapture? Is there not? What's the timeline? Is it? None of that means anything if you don't have Christ.
Right.
And this should be calling you to know Christ and obey Him.
Amen.
Right?
Absolutely. Well, I can't think of a better way to end this one than with Revelation chapter 7, verse 10. It says, "Salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb." Until next time.
Thanks for listening. Salty Believer Unscripted is a production of SaltyBeliever.com. Visit the website to find more resources like the podcast you've just listened to.